Yo, what's up? Good afternoon, RotoGrinders, and welcome to the PlateIQ webinar here at RotoGrinders.com, identifying DFS targets using PlateIQ. My name is Chris Gimino. I'll be talking PlateIQ as I like to do every now and then on RotoGrinders Premium, along with somebody who you may know from RotoGrinders Premium and the $1 Million Musings, CheeseIsGood, Dave Potts. Dave, what's going on, man?
Howdy. I am glad to be here. I don't know. I'm no historian, but I think this is the first time I've ever done a webinar officially. So this is officially a first for me.
Yeah, webinar is like a term they morphed in the business world. I used to have to do webinars when I worked in sales for many years, and there was just the idea that if you put a seminar on the internet, it's technically a webinar. I guess I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but that's what we're calling it.
Well, now I'm in the loop, so now I'm a businessman too.
Now, they don't do webinars on the traveling musician circuit?
I don't believe so. We sing songs and send them out into the world on the internet, but I don't think they ever get a nard in a web sort of way.
All right, well, let's get a nard here. What we're going to talk about here is PlateIQ and sort of the theory behind how you break down a baseball player on a given day and how you can use stats to try to identify that. And I kind of want to point to something that I saw in the $1 Million Musings today, just to kind of start this off here as we want to start understanding PlateIQ and how to use it and really what it is we're actually looking for when we look at the sea of numbers in MLB DFS. You said about Jaime Garcia that he's at the bottom of your list today, that he has a low strikeout rate and 9.9% walks in the last month, and that he's lost his ground ball ability. So those are three stats that people talk about a lot in MLB DFS. But you said that he's a guy without those things that doesn't have a single positive skill. And Cheese, I have a question for you. How are numbers skills?
So I use the term skills a lot in my article. I'll say this guy has a plus skill here or no skill at this. Essentially, everything that a baseball player can do as far as where he throws a ball, how he hits a ball, can be traced back to a number that essentially you can call it a skill, you can call it a data point, but you can identify what a guy is good at or bad at based on looking at all these different skills that are broken out on PlateIQ. Every guy does something just a little bit differently than somebody else. We know what these league averages are and all these numbers, and over time we get to see certain guys just do things extremely well and do other things extremely poorly. And after a certain sample size, you can count on that happening over and over again.
Right. So these numbers are actually just indicators of actual skills. Like, someone doesn't have the ability to go home and practice ground ball percent. They have the ability to go home and practice where they locate their pitches and their arm slot and their, working on their velocity and all the different skills that a pitcher might work on. It's just a way of saying that the numbers themselves are really just indicators of skills. They're not actual, they're not skills themselves. So that's kind of a theme that I want to present throughout this whole thing, is that we're really just trying to use the numbers to identify what skills may be present without zooming in on some of the nitty gritty that we may not have time to get over every single day in DFS analysis, because I'm sure, as you know, there's just an endless sea of numbers.
Yeah, that's one thing that I like about what we've done with PlateIQ. We put all the stuff here where you can get to learn what stats do you think are the most important. You like to look at it, and you can spend an hour per batter going around to all sorts of data sources and looking at endless numbers of, how does he hit on 2-strike pitches against curveballs from left-handed pitch? It never ends, but I feel like we've put the most important stuff that you need to know right in one spot.
All right, let's jump into PlateIQ. Devin, if you can put some magic on and teleport us inside the PlateIQ tool, that's where I think we want to be. I don't think we're doing much good here, as much of eye candy as we are, Dave.
Arguable.
I don't think that's arguable. I mean, at least not in your case. I mean, you are definitely a fantastic looking man. All right, let's jump into the tool here. Devin, are we in?
Yeah, I think we're got the PlateIQ up.
All right, let's do it. So let's talk about batted ball trajectory. Dave, when you take a look at pitchers on a daily basis, you had mentioned that Jaime Garcia lost his ground ball ability. Why is ground ball ability something that's important for MLB pitchers to possess?
So if you can basically split all pitches up into three categories, like you'll see here: ground balls, line drives, and fly balls. And if you just think about what a ground ball is, essentially, it's almost impossible to get anything better than a single on a ground ball. I mean, every once in a while, it'll go just to the right place and you'll get a double. But ground balls are really hard to do anything with. You're not going to give up home runs on ground balls. Ground balls lead to double plays. Ground balls lead to short innings. Ground balls lead to a bunch of balls hit to your fielders. And it basically raises sort of the safety level of a pitcher. And talking about batters, against that pitcher later, it's also harder for a batter to hit a home run or even an extra base hit on a ground ball.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. So you take a look at a guy like Kendrys Morales, who you look at the next thing we'll talk about, which is contact quality, like hard contact or exit velocity or one of those things. And he's a guy hits a ball hard all the time. Problem with this guy is he hits too many ground balls. Most of the time when he hits a ground ball, like this year, I think he's like, I don't know, something like 5 for 38 when he hits a ground ball or a pop fly, versus like 14 for 22 when he hits an ideal trajectory line drive or a fly ball. So any kind of a pitcher that's got a propensity to deliver ground balls against a guy like Morales is going to be in a much better spot to get him out, because he's certainly not fast enough to beat out a ground ball, and he's probably not going to do all that much damage on any type of a pop-up. So you're really looking to try to find guys who are avoiding those ideal trajectory hits when you're looking at pitchers. Any other comments here on batted ball trajectory?
No, I mean, while you mentioned the Kendrys Morales thing, I'll just mention that, different batters, a ground ball against Kendrys Morales is a very different thing than a ground ball against D. Gordon. Certain batters here and there, you might want ground balls from. Mainly we're thinking speedsters. But if you're rostering a power hitter for a home run upside and he gets you a ground ball, you're never going to be happy with it, even if it turns into a single.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head there. It's definitely great to be identifying pitchers who have that safety of the ground ball right now. There's also the idea that you talk about with pitchers a lot is their hard contact percentage, their ability to limit hard contact and create soft contact. And you talk about that a little bit. Like, obviously hitting the ball hard is a bad thing for a pitcher to do, a good thing for a batter to do. But what is the difference between identifying guys who allow hard contact and who limit soft contact or actually create it?
Yeah, so we have the hard hit percentage as well as the soft hit percentage. I usually look at hard hit percentage first, and looking to limit hard hit percentage over an extended period of time. I want to mention right off the bat that very small sample sizes of things like hard hit percentage can be dangerous. We do need, you can't just look at a couple at bats and say, oh, look, you didn't give up a hard hit. But once we have a couple seasons worth of data, you see guys that just regularly don't allow hard hits or regularly do allow hard hits. And if you think about, skills of a pitcher, we'll go back to skills. A skill, it's not necessarily a skill to limit hard contact, but it is a skill to be able to throw the ball to a certain part of the plate that makes it nearly impossible for a hitter to square the ball up, which is where that soft contact comes from. So you see certain pitchers, and it's, the guys you would think just year after year, their hard contact rate is just considerably lower than average. And other pitchers, there's just nothing they can do about it. And you can look back year after year, and their hard hit rate is always far above average.
Yeah, and that's just a way of mentioning, how do soft hits happen? How do ground balls happen? They happen because of the pitches and the locations that a pitcher throws, the mix of pitches that he throws, his ability to get ahead and stay ahead in the count and really control an at-bat. Pitchers do it in different ways. There's not one way that pitchers will look to try to get guys out or even a specific hitter out at all times. But one of the biggest things is that there is a definite skill in being able to keep hitters guessing and be able to fool them to some degree. And then, of course, there's always that element, like you mentioned, of just located in a spot where you just absolutely can't create the hard contact.
Yeah, if you think about the difference in, it doesn't matter who the hitter is. If you throw a fastball right down the middle of the plate versus a fastball that hits the very bottom corner farthest away from the batter, it's obvious that one of those is going to go for hard hits more than another. Like, it's not an accident after you get this sample size of how guys are squaring the ball up against somebody.
Yep, and everything's got its exception to the rule. I mean, there's just guys with really long arms and really long extensions and reaches that can get out there and hit those pitches. But again, the idea is, hard contact and soft contact are not skills in and of themselves, but they could potentially be identifying skills that a pitcher possesses to either limit hard contact, create soft contact, etc. And that's why we want to look at those when we're talking about breaking down plate IQ and breaking down pitchers for a day. So where do home runs come from, Cheese? This is something I've seen you talk about for years as far as what we're trying to identify when we want to try to find pitchers who could potentially allow home runs. How do they happen?
Yeah, so one of the first things I ever did for RotoGrinders, I wrote an article that seemed almost dumb at the time that was just simply called "Where Do Home Runs Come From?" And the answer was, as plain as it sounds, and yet somehow people didn't seem to talk about it, it comes from hitting balls hard and hitting balls in the air. Like, it's the most obvious, logical thing when you just say it that plainly. But for the longest time, that seemed to go overlooked. Like, until this StatCast data started coming out and people started talking about exit velocity and launch angle, it was always kind of this vague, well, this guy hits home runs and this guy doesn't, and this guy gives up home runs. Well, obviously, now that we have the data to look at, it is as simple as fly balls that get hit hard go for home runs. And it makes logical sense, and the numbers continue to bear it out.
Yeah, but Cheese is referring to things like average exit velocity, percentage over 95 miles per hour, average distance, these StatCast numbers. We're basically just trying to identify guys who allow the types of hits that go for home runs. They don't always go for home runs, but the chances are if you're allowing hard hit fly balls, everyone's got a certain percentage of home run to fly ball ratio that they can expect to have in the long run. And guys who are not generating that kind of contact are just not going to see quite as many home runs against them.
Exactly.
All right. So let's hop into a different type of analysis that you hear people talk about every single day when it comes to DFS, and let's talk about splits. How do you kind of weight and measure splits? Is the overall performance of a pitcher more important to you, or are you really someone who likes to pay attention to what a pitcher's splits are?
Yeah, the most general way to say it is that the pitcher splits are extremely important, more important than the overall skills, whereas the hitter splits need a little more context generally and more sample size. Pitchers, because of the certain pitches guys throw, they're just very naturally sometimes way better or way worse to one-handedness. Certain pitches don't work, may not work against lefties at all, but work great against righties, and that's the only pitch a guy has. And we see kind of the same thing you see with limiting hard hits or getting ground balls. These skills, you want to make sure you have a sample size of a couple seasons where you can look back and say, every single year this guy's strikeouts are twice as high to righties, or every single year he gets ground balls to righties with fly balls to lefties. You see these things all the time, and it's not fluke. After a while, you just have to realize that certain pitches, this guy just doesn't have the pitch to get out lefties that he does to get out righties, or vice versa. So I always go to the splits first when I'm looking at the pitcher.
Yeah, and in PlateIQ, you will see that we have identified with red and green conditional formatting which numbers are good and which numbers are bad in each pitcher's individual splits if you're a premium member. And that's very helpful in trying to determine at a very quick glance whether or not he's good to either side of the plate or better to one side of the plate than the other. This is actually David Hess we're looking at here, Cheese, and it looks like he doesn't have too many good green conditional formats here. You'll notice against righties, he doesn't walk as many righties, and you do tend to see that a lot where a guy will walk hitters from one side of the plate a lot more than the other. Any particular insight you want to add to that?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see guys who they know that they don't have the same stuff against. Usually it's a right-handed pitcher against a left-handed batter. We've seen it this year with guys like Julius Chacin and James Shields, that like they're smart enough to know they can't strike out lefties or limit hard contact from lefties like they can against righties. So they're pitching way outside to the edges of the zone, hoping they get somebody to chase, and really just willing to give up a walk, knowing that they don't have the stuff to get the strikeouts. Something I want to touch on before I forget, we've got the red and green formatting. When you're looking at a pitcher as far as do you want to use this pitcher in DFS today, fly balls are not necessarily a bad thing for a pitcher. I want to point out that either really high ground balls or really fly balls can be a skill that they're trying to do on purpose. It's not always an accident, like, oh, I accidentally gave up a fly ball. Like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander are extreme fly ball pitchers. It doesn't make them bad, and it's not by accident. That's just the way their pitching style works. That's where they can get their soft contact. So I don't want you to rule a pitcher out because he's a fly ball pitcher. It's more a matter of what can a hitter do against this guy, and make sure you're looking at the hard contact along with it. Like a soft hit fly ball is just a pop-up. That's just as much as an easy out as a ground ball is.
Yeah, and you've seen it when guys like Scherzer and Verlander struggle. They'll tend to be struggling in games where they gave up a home run or maybe 2 home runs or just some hard hit aerial contact. And that's been in the past. It's not very often that you see those guys struggle, of course, but it's just the nature that I'm trying to point out here is that, yes, they are extreme fly ball pitchers, and it's difficult to make a conditional format for trajectory that says, well, this guy's fly balls aren't that bad, but this other guy's fly balls are really bad. So what we're really just trying to say here is that it's not necessarily a universal thing that fly balls are always going to be bad. You'll see your Max Scherzers and your Verlanders allowing lots of fly balls and getting tons of outs, and then you'll see other guys who struggle a little bit with the fly ball, say like an Ian Kennedy.
And the obvious difference, and the way you know it, is the strikeout percentage. High strikeouts are always good, and low strikeouts are always bad. There's no exception to that. And so it's one thing if a guy like Max Scherzer gives up 50% fly balls but strikes out almost 40% of batters. It just automatically lowers the risk from those fly balls because there's just half as many of them. So always strikeouts first. That's all. I just want to point that out.
Let's take a quick time out to just mention what we've kind of said so far and what that might mean for the guy that we're looking at right now, David Hess. We said basically we want to find a guy who tries to generate ground balls, which he does not. We want to try to find a guy who limits fly balls. He does not do that. Limits hard contact and creates soft contact. We're not seeing a whole lot of that from David Hess. Certainly average exit velocity is elevated for a guy like Hess. We mentioned ideal trajectories and hitting, not just hitting fly balls, but hitting fly balls that go at ideal trajectories. We have what's called well hit percentage in PlateIQ, which is StatCast launch angles between 22 and 36 greater than 80 miles per hour, and also high value, which is an xWOBA greater than 0.878. Basically, it means it's basically always at least a single anytime that hit gets put into play. He's not doing tremendously well in any of these indicators. And then we scroll down to his splits, and you're seeing that he's not really doing particularly well to either side of the plate. He has low walks against righties, which means basically he's just throwing them strikes and not limiting the hard contact when he's doing it. I'm seeing a lot of concerning things with the pitcher like Hess. Maybe you can dispute this, but he's not striking batters out either. All the things we talk about being good, I'm not seeing him here for this pitcher.
Right. This is an obviously attackable skill set. That's a term I'll throw around a lot when I'm writing my article as well. This guy is attackable with righties or attackable with lefties, or he has an attackable skill set. What I mean is that the hitters should have the advantage in this matchup. This guy doesn't do anything particularly well. And with Hess, like we're looking at, the low strikeouts are the most important thing. Hitters can put the ball in play. They can hit fly balls. They can hit fly balls hard. And low walks to righties, like you pointed out, if the strikeouts are also that low, that's not a positive as far as batters against him. It just, like you say, all that means is he's throwing a bunch of balls in the strike zone and can't really stop them from getting hit harder in the air.
So explain when I see we're going to transition to production now, because a lot of people talk about production, Cheese. They talk about WOBA and ISO and these things that happened after the skills. In my opinion, the skills come first. You did something to throw a pitch that either generated a ground ball, fly ball, hard hit. Something happened prior to the result of the at-bat. Then the ball goes in the air and something happens. Either it goes to a fielder, it lands in the field of play, it lands in the seats, or it lands in someone's glove. The idea being that end result, production, WOBA, ISO, people talk about that a lot. And maybe it's a good time to talk about Hess here, who's got a 264 WOBA, or, in general, not a very good for batters WOBA that you would say for right-handed bats, yet all these other numbers are bad for him. Explain how can that be? How can we like everything about him against right-handed batters, and then his production stat is not good for batters?
Yeah, so this brings in two things. On Hess specifically, and is important to keep in mind overall, this is a young guy who only has a few innings under his belt. So his sample size as far as the WOBA has not been able to catch up, meaning after he has more innings, the result of these other skills we're seeing are almost certainly going to end up in a higher WOBA. You're probably familiar or at least heard of the stats BABIP and home run to fly ball rate. BABIP meaning batting average on balls in play, or home run to fly ball percentage. Over a long period of time, hitters all regress toward league average in those stats. Some pitchers have a slightly better than average or worse than average ability to limit BABIP. But especially in a small sample size, that's an incredibly fluky number. So basically, if you just think, a guy gives up 6 line drives one game, 5 of them might just get caught by the left fielder. But he still gave up 6 line drives, and we're always going to assume that those line drives are going to end up being hits at the same high level as normal. And where WOBA falls short is it does not factor in those luck stats. It's subject to the same problem as something like batting average or, a short sample size. A guy gets exceedingly lucky or unlucky on balls in play. The WOBA is not going to show that. So I always lean towards these other skills first. Like, I just want a guy who's going to hit the ball hard, and hit the ball in the air. And I will trust that, over time, things are going to happen in the right way. And in fact, it's almost a good thing when it hasn't happened yet, because that affects the DFS salaries and people's perception of these players. So WOBA is kind of, honestly, the last thing I look at. And I'm looking first at these individual skills.
Yeah, so you see that, a guy like Hess has a low BABIP, so the story sort of checks out that maybe there's some luck that's due to go against him when it comes to batted balls, and I would say particularly against right-handed bats, unless he starts to change these outcomes that we're seeing over here. We'll kind of get into what that means for the hitters against him here tonight in just a second, but that's a good way to phrase it here. I don't, people talk about WOBA and ISO all the time, and I think that's all well and good. I like doing it, but the production stats that I like to look at more often, we've already talked about a couple of times: strikeout percentage and walk percentage. I think those are 2 stats that we can look to more as indicators of skill.
Yeah, and the other thing to point out on those, strikeouts and walks are the things that stabilized quickest as far as sample size. So, 2 months into the season, guys who have been in the lineup on a regular basis, they have enough sample size for those strikeouts and walks to be their believable levels. The next thing that stabilizes ground ball and fly ball percentage, which is why we talk about that. The things that it takes the longest to stabilize are BABIP and home run to fly ball rate, thus leading into WOBA.
Right. So that's why I like to, when we talk about these pitcher skills, if a guy is not striking batters out and still allowing fly balls and still allowing hard contact, that's where it makes sense that this guy is probably displaying some tendency to be an attackable pitcher, as we talked about. If he's displaying high walks to either side of the plate, and as we can see against lefties, he has a little bit of an elevated walk rate here, does Hess. That's a situation where we can start to look at stacks, because he's going to put base runners on for free, which could lead to, instead of just a solo home run, if your guy's lucky enough to hit a home run, it could be a 2-run shot, a 3-run shot. Guys could have stolen base capability to steal bases when they get on base. Basically, the potential for runs becomes exponentially higher as more base runners get on.
Yes. And you always want to keep an eye on, like we pointed out, with the splits, does he only walk one-handed as a batter? And, if so, that can help you figure out how you want to build your lineup. Are you playing, do you want to get a bunch of these guys who are probably going to get on base via the walk? Or are you only playing for a one-off power hitter where you, would almost prefer the guy to throw more strikes, kind of like we see to the righties here? And that helps you figure out if you're stacking or if you're just playing one batter on his own.
All right, let's move on to plate discipline, Cheese. Let's talk about the idea that we talked about earlier about skills and where guys are locating pitches. How well are they doing getting a hit in the count? What are they doing to try to stay in favorable situations? I think it makes sense to say that if a pitcher is ahead in the count, he's at the advantage. He's always at the advantage. The pitcher is basically always even Sal Romano's at the advantage. Cheese.
Yeah, it's a small advantage, but I'll go.
But you get an even bigger advantage when you're ahead in the count, and that's the same. The same goes for the batter. They're actually getting a little bit of an edge when the pitcher's behind in the count. So let's talk about plate discipline and what some of those skills mean. Everyone talks about swinging strike percentage a lot. We'll get to that, but I want to talk about first pitch strike percentage and how we can use that to our advantage.
Yeah, so a lot of guys that struggle with walks, especially, you'll see a really low first strike percentage. For Hess, that's actually pretty good. Like the average first pitch strike percentage is like 60%. Again, Hess, we're dealing with such a small sample size. We don't really know where he'll end up. That's almost more like a Garrett Cole first strike percentage. It always gives the pitcher a better chance not to fall behind in the count, which, as we'll learn, like that's one of the worst things a pitcher can do is, you don't want your pitcher down 3-1 in a count or 2-0. First pitch strikes kind of just give the pitcher a leg up. And they sometimes go in line with the fact that we see, the low walks to righties with Hess and the low strikeouts. This all goes together to imply he just kind of throws a bunch of pitches in the strike zone. And so guys are going to hit it. So it's not going to lead to strikeouts or walks. But with the better pitchers, especially guys who have swinging strike percentage and first strikes, that's part of the reason why they're so good is they're getting ahead in the count and putting the hitter on their heels right off the bat. The other thing a low first strike percentage can do is lead to high pitch counts. There's a lot of pitchers, these Eduardo Rodriguez type pitchers, that maybe they're good, but it takes them just a tremendous amount of pitches to get through an inning. And that can be a lot of the reason for it is they're not getting first pitch strikes.
Right. And it all lines up here for Hess. He's getting first pitch strikes. He's getting ahead in the count, but what he's not doing once he's ahead in the count is delivering the kind of stuff that can finish off a hitter. He's still throwing strikes when he's ahead in the count, and hitters are unfortunately able to make contact. They have that 80% contact rate, which is, roughly average, somewhere in the neighborhood of like the middling range here for contact percentage. But he's also, not getting a lot of strikeouts when it's all said and done, just a 12.6% strikeout rate. His swinging strike percent indicates that he could have possibly more strikeouts in the future at 9.6. You figure that the general rule of thumb is that guys can roughly double that as far as strikeout percentages or swinging strike percentage. But at the end of the day, there's still not a lot of strikeouts here for a guy like Hess, even though he's getting ahead in the count here. He's throwing hittable strikes, and it's showing on paper. Yeah.
And like with swinging strikes, league average is about 10.5%. So even if he gets some more strikeouts, this is still a below average strikeout pitcher.
So I hope that's useful as far as plate discipline is concerned and why it's important for guys to be throwing strikes and to be able to have the ability to finish guys off with, say, a swinging strike percentage to get those strikeout rates. Again, a lot of guys like Cardi will say that the strikeout rate is way more important. I actually agree with that, but the swinging strike percentage is a way to sort of validate that if you're looking for some validation as far as whether or not it might be real.
And that's a lot of where sample size comes in. Once a pitcher has, 3 seasons of sample size that says they get strikeouts and they don't have the swinging strikes, then it matches up because you've seen it happen. Where I like to look at it is when a pitcher early in the year or goes through a small stretch where their strikeout rate is significantly up or down without any other change in their pitch type. If the swinging strikes are the same, that's more of an indicator that this is just a short period of kind of a fluky strikeout rate in one way or the other.
All right, let's flip it around to hitters. Let's talk about the hitter side of the coin here, Cheese. Let's take a look at what's going on here with the Toronto Blue Jays against Hess. We kind of just broke down what we don't really like, especially not left-handed bats against Hess. We don't think that he stands a real good chance of trying to limit the damage here. When you kind of break down what's going on with the Blue Jays today, where did you land as guys that you might want to target here tonight?
So similar stuff. Like we're looking at the same basic things with the hitters we're looking at with the pitchers. The first thing I want is to make sure the guy is going to put the ball in play. So we can go to way over on the side. We've got contact percentage. The more you make contact, the more you're putting the ball in play. And you can kind of match this up hitter versus pitcher. So a low strikeout pitcher like Hess against a high contact hitter, you're more or less guaranteed you're getting balls in play. And then once you have that, then you want to find guys who put the ball in play with hard hit ability. And if we're looking at a fly ball pitcher like Hess, we want home runs. So we want fly balls. I always want line drives. Like a line drive is the best kind of hit a hitter can get. Line drives go for hits and extra base hits like 5 times as often as any other kind of contact. It's the best thing you can do with a baseball. It's what makes Joey Votto and Freddie Freeman so good. But what I don't want is a ground ball hitter against a ground ball pitcher for the most part, because that's always going to be a ground ball unless you're searching for a speed guy and he's cheap. But generally, you want contact, you want hard contact, and you want some sort of balls in the air ability.
Yeah, so let's kind of look at this from 2 different angles. Let's talk first about Curtis Granderson, who's one of his bigger Achilles heels is he strikes out too much, especially against left-handed bats. But against right-handed bats or pitchers, he has a pretty large strikeout rate on his own right. 25% as far as what the numbers we're looking at on a blended basis back to last season. So when I see what's going on here with Hess, and he's not striking guys out, Granderson's got a low ground ball percentage. He's got a high fly ball percentage. He's got a decent hard hit percentage and a decent contact percentage. You would call that guy a pretty good target for tonight, wouldn't you?
I would. So Granderson and Smoke are the 2 guys that jump out here on this Blue Jays team just from those numbers. They both hit the ball in the air. They both hit the ball hard. Both make decent contact. And when you factor in the low strikeouts of Hess, the contact becomes less of a problem. So like if you compare it to Solarte hitting in between them, yeah, Solarte's contact's a little better, but you can see the soft hit percentage being so much higher. It's an obvious difference in, he puts more balls in play but doesn't hit them quite as hard. Well, that's fine. I don't mind a hitter like that, depending on salary, depending on team context. But if you're just looking for, who might hit a home run tonight, you want the guys who hit the ball harder and hit the ball in the air.
Last thing I want to add here about this top of the Blue Jays orders and the hitter stack as far as contact percentage, hard contact, and fly balls is that we see that a guy like Morales does not hit a lot of fly balls. That's actually his biggest problem, is he's not hitting enough of them. When he actually hits them, he's doing very, very well. It's just that these, elevated rate of ground balls and pop-ups is really killing him so far this season. I've never seen a guy hit like 94 mile per hour exit velocity, or right going back to last year, it's 92. If you went to this season alone, it's up to like 94, and yet his isolated power and his WOBA numbers are terrifying. They're just very, very low. With a guy like Hess tonight, if this is a guy that has a propensity to get fly balls and not allow guys to hit ground balls, and this guy's hitting the ball so hard, I would call him a tournament option, because you could see the better end of what Morales does.
There's still a lot of hitters who have relatively high ground ball rates, but if you look at them at the end of the year, you see plenty of home runs and plenty of hard hits. Well, all those home runs come from times generally when they're facing fly ball pitchers. Like I say, the ground ball hitter against the ground ball pitcher, you're just going to end up with the ground ball almost all the time. So, there's more extreme examples with guys like, Christian Yelich, who's a great hitter. It's a ton of ground balls. You want these kind of guys against fly ball pitchers. So if you're going to take a chance on a cheap hitter like Morales, who, like you say, hits the ball hard, but too many ground balls, you want to do that against a fly ball pitcher.
Cool. All right. Anything else you want to point out about hitter stats to look at? I mean, we talked a little bit about the production stats, walk rates, strikeout rates, and all these sorts of things. I think those are kind of the biggest things that I like to look at when it comes to just these basic stats in PlateIQ. But are there any other hitter metrics that you're looking for up here at the top that you think can help us pick out some hitters for a slate?
Those are the important ones. And I just want to double stress that it's the same stats that I'm looking at for hitters and I'm looking at for pitchers. These are the things that are the building blocks of what's going to actually happen. There's a ton of the variance in baseball comes from once a ball's hit in play, a lot of things can go right or a lot of things can go wrong, sort of by accident or where a fielder happens to be standing. but there's not a lot of accident in, does a ball get hit? Does it get hit hard? Does it get hit on the ground or in the air? So those are the things I'm focusing on.
It almost sounds simple when we put it like this, Cheese. I mean, with all these numbers and all these different confusing acronyms, it's like, God, we want guys who hit the ball hard and in the air, basically.
It's really silly. And what's even sillier to me is the fact that until the StatCast data came along and people started talking about launch angles, it's almost like some of the batters themselves didn't even realize it. Like last year, we started seeing all these batters with newly found fly ball rates and high launch. It's like, did somebody really have to tell you mathematically that more home runs come when you hit the ball hard and in the air? And they did. Like,
yes, it was Daniel Murphy.
Yes. It seems like they should have figured that out years ago, but Daniel Murphy showed them on a chart and a graph and a colored pie chart, and now they're doing it.
All right, let's talk about overall matchups for pitcher. So we broke down what we think about the pitcher skill. We broke down what we think about the hitter skill. If we were talking about looking at, say, like David Hess in tournaments or something, for whatever reason, we drank a lot of hard liquor, and now we're interested in David Hess, we might look at what's going on with this Toronto lineup and try to find something we like from the overall matchup. I scroll down to this section of PlateIQ where we've kind of got some counts on high strikeout hitters, high walk hitters, high WOBA, high ISO, high ground ball, high hard hit percentage type guys. I think this is an interesting way to sort of summarize in a heartbeat whether or not you think the matchup is better or worse than usual. You're trying to find a higher number of the things we like to see for our opponents and a lower number of things we don't like, such as those isolated power hitters and those hard hitters versus the guys who have the high strikeouts. So when you look at something like Toronto tonight, you see 6 high strikeout hitters. What do you think about that if you were trying to use a guy like Hess, let's say, tonight?
Yeah, so what I like about this is it's a little better to separate it this way than just plain old what is the strikeout rate of this team, even though that's still the first thing I'm going to look at. But, sometimes a team that has 1 or 2 really elite contact hitters or 1 or 2 extremely high strikeout hitters can skew the numbers of the whole team overall. So I do look like that, just plain old how many high K hitters does this team have? And then, the high walk batters kind of next to it matters more when you start getting guys who are a little bit wild. So when I'm thinking about what pitchers I want to use, especially in tournaments, strikeout upside is the whole thing. So if I can sort of separate today's high strikeout pitchers into a group and then see, so which one of these guys not just faces the team with the highest overall strikeout rate, but has the most high strikeout individual matchups. I think that's a really good key for tournaments and finding guys that can get strikeouts.
The other side of the matchup today, Garcia, who we mentioned, we don't like him. Like we're not really talking about tonight's slate. We're really just talking overall in general how to break down guys with PlateIQ. But let's say we were talking about a guy like Garcia who has a little bit more in that strikeout capability range, or at least he used to. This is a spot where you'd be looking at how many guys are walking on my opponent team, how many guys are striking out, because I think this is where you can take those riskier guys and try to find some make or break points.
Yep. So this is a good example of the team overall, how is their strikeout rate versus if you just go batter by batter, how many high strikeout batters are there? If there's only 4 high strikeout batters, even though the team's strikeout rate overall is kind of high, that's because they have a bunch of kind of decent middle of the road contact hitters, but they're not all, Chris Davis is sort of skewing the whole team's number by himself. So sure it's not the same as if you had, 7 high strikeout hitters with 2 elite contact hitters. That would actually give the guy more overall strikeout upside.
All right, cool. So that's really just a little bit of an insight as to what you can use this matchup section of PlateIQ for. And this all hitters tab over here is what Cheese is talking about when he says the overall rate of a team. You're just averaging what the team is doing as a whole, and certain guys can skew it one way or the other. That's why I like this matchup section just a little bit better when trying to figure out what the guy's overall matchup actually is. And of course, I'm going to segue that into, if you actually want to know what a guy's overall matchup really is, if you're a premium subscriber, we have what's called these PlateIQ ratings, where basically we started comparing K rates from the pitcher to K rates to the batter through all these different splits, literally hundreds and hundreds of stats that we're comparing on a day-by-day basis to come up with just a real simple comparison. Is this good or is this not good for each? Who does this favor? Basically, is what you want to look at, and it's kind of telling you what it thinks about the matchup on an overall basis for every single one of these categories we just talked about: contact quality, production, plate discipline. We're also going to look at what they've been doing recently, and we're also going to look at their pitch types and their strikeout ability to try to figure out, what it is this guy's overall matchup means, with 50 being about average. And it looks like Jaime Garcia is a little bit below average here tonight, despite Baltimore not being a tremendous offense this year.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the PlateIQ rating because it does, it takes all these factors into account as sort of a quick glance. It can sort of help you separate, if you're short on time for research, you can at least help kind of sort out a bucket of guys. Okay, let me look at these 5 pitchers who all rate out pretty well based on these numbers.
Find these numbers in Lineup HQ if you want to see a full list of everyone on the slate. One thing I do want to caution with the PlateIQ ratings, they're not projections and they're not rankings of, this is a stacked ranked who are the best plays today. It's something close to that, but really you're just trying to look at it individually for that batter. How much further above 50 is this matchup? And if it's further above 50, then it's a better matchup by the numbers. It doesn't necessarily mean he's always a better DFS play just because the number's higher.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors, but like I say, I think this does a good job of separating into groups for you where you can then dig a little deeper on your own into these different numbers we're looking at.
And I like that it stratifies the individual lineup. Like I can tell who's got the best splits in this individual lineup against this individual pitcher as much as I can tell when I'm comparing it to the rest of the matchups on the slate. So I do like the PlateIQ ratings as a way to try to narrow a player pool. I think a lot of people are enjoying them. That's relatively new. So let's move on to pitch type data, Cheese. A lot of people talking about pitch type data. A lot of people talking about the XWOBA. Boy, I don't want to get on tilt about the XWOBA right now. It's not the time or the place for that. But let's talk about pitch types real quick. And how can you use them? Well, first of all, of this pitching information, what do you find the most useful? Because I'm telling you right now, it's not these numbers over here that I like to look at the most. I like to look at these numbers here, the throw percentage and the velocity.
Yeah, so a couple things I'll say about this is you can definitely get yourself into more trouble than you can help yourself with some of this stuff. And I agree with what you just said there. What you want to see with a pitcher, like if you're going to try to dig further into a batter's matchup, you want to know, does a pitcher throw 1 or 2 pitches basically all the time? Like if you see a pitcher who has 5 different pitches that he throws 20% of the time each, there's only so much you can do with that to even figure out what a hitter might do against those pitches. You don't know what pitch that hitter's going to see. The more we get a pitcher who throws the same pitch the majority of the time, the easier it is to look at that, how the hitters do against that particular pitch. But where this is really useful is when a pitcher is showing better or worse numbers than you would expect or than he's shown in the past, quite often it can be traced to there's something different going on. Maybe he's added or lost velocity, or maybe he's added a pitch or is not throwing a pitch he used to throw. Most of the time when there's just this seemingly bizarre change in pitcher's skills, there's usually a reason for it in one of these 2 numbers.
Yep. And sometimes that reason is injury or something's wrong with the guy physically. That's a little bit tough to understand without knowing them. I know you got a lot of connections, Cheese. You can just call Kershaw and figure out, you could have known about the back thing, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we do physical therapy together now. Actually, he comes with me.
Yeah, right. But otherwise, the numbers can actually give us a clue when a guy's feeling better too. If you start to see that velocity go on the uptick, or maybe he's changed something about his mechanics, something about the way that he's delivering the baseball. You want to be looking for these changes in velocity and these changes in throw percent. I think in the relatively near future, we're going to have some ways for you to be identifying that automatically in PlateIQ. But in the long term, just know that's something we're going to keep our eye on. We're going to make sure that we understand how to show you which numbers that these guys throw as a percentage by split too. So, because sometimes you'll see a guy will throw, his changeup against only one hand or the other, or he won't throw a certain pitch against a certain hand of a batter.
Yeah, there's so many things you can dig into with all this. And to me, if you were going to start with just one thing, I would tell you to start with, if you're trying to identify what's going wrong with a pitcher, check the velocity. Last year, did he throw 92 miles an hour, and this year he's throwing 89 and he's all of a sudden worse? Well, that's why he's worse.
There you go. velocity, pitch type as far as their percentages. And then at that point in time, if you see like a really strong tendency, Cheese, that's where you're recommending that, okay, then it might be okay to scroll down here to the batter section and start getting really excited about how does he do against X type of a pitch. Because, we've actually seen with these Blue Jays that there's, over the last year or so, some of these hitters have struggled against certain types of breaking balls. You see Josh Donaldson chase sliders outside the zone all the time. And, some of these guys don't have good contact percentages here on the Orioles against, this is fastballs, which to me, that's actually somewhat alarming. Anytime you see a guy with a low contact percentage against a fastball, that just tells me this guy's not a really good contact hitter. But, you'll see different tendencies with different types of pitchers against different hitters. And, you're really looking for something that you can really sink your teeth into as far as a real tendency. Otherwise, it could be just noise.
Yeah, this is where I feel like most of the time you don't need to be digging this deep. Like if you start looking at every batter and trying to figure out, is he going to see sinkers tonight or is he going to see sliders, and you start going pitch by pitch, you're starting to bring in a lot of noise and a lot more randomness. I mostly use this if we do have a pitcher who's basically a two-pitch pitcher, and if the hitter hits both of those pitches well, then it's something we don't have to worry about, or maybe he can't hit either of them and we can knock them down the list. But for the most part, most starting pitchers have, 3 or 4 pitches that they're splitting up. And for you to try to figure out, I think this guy's going to get the fastball tonight, you're going down a pretty deep rabbit hole.
Hey, Cheese, I want to share something about pitch types, though, that I know about tonight's matchups here. So if you're watching this live, of course, we're recording this, and we're going to have this forever and ever for people to watch to try to get in tune with how to use PlateIQ. But one thing that I've seen in the past year is that you get a guy like Machado, excellent hitter. Just you have to be blind to not notice him this season. High ground ball percentage against the two-seam fastball, but he's got a very high contact percentage in general. And I'm just going to look at Jaime Garcia's percentage of two-seamers, 28%. Over the last 2 years since the beginning of 2017. Well, if we take a look at what he's doing this year, as far as that pitch type, I think he's throwing that quite a bit more. No, he's throwing it about the same this season, but he's throwing a lot more fastballs in general. And we've seen that Machado's also very good against the four-seam fastball. So you got a guy throwing like 50, 60% fastballs against a guy who absolutely crushes them. And that's why I think it's pretty hard to ignore Machado in DFS lineups. And you want to talk about a way to use a pitch type. I'm seeing 60% of fastball pitch types against a guy who crushes them, and I think that's a really strong indicator.
Yeah, like I say, if you can narrow down the majority of this guy's pitches are of this type and this guy hits them all the better, as long as the stuff we looked at above matches up, which it absolutely does with Machado.
Yeah, and look, you don't need this kind of, like you said, you don't need this level of depth to know you can use Machado here tonight. It's just like sort of the extra icing on the cake if you have a little bit of extra time to dig into it. But I'm going to side with Cheese here that we don't get too overly excited about the pitch type stuff and focus on what we've talked about at the beginning of this webinar by and large. All right, so final thoughts here, Cheese. When you talk about PlateIQ, we talk about how to break down a matchup. Is there any parting wisdom as far as, how to not overcomplicate this and really keep it simple?
Yeah, so it sort of depends on where you've started from. Like if a lot of this is new to you, I would tell you just start with plain old strikeouts and walks and ground balls and fly balls and hard hits. Simply, is a guy going to hit the ball? If he is he going to hit it on the ground or in the air? And is he going to hit it hard? Like it's like you said, it's kind of really logical when you say it like that. But that's the thing that you can figure out. The easiest thing to figure out is simply, is this guy likely to strike out or not? So you can use all this to figure out who's going to put the ball in play, who's going to put it in play hard. And that's what I'd be looking for.
All right, guys. If there's any questions out there in the chat, speak now. I've just now taken over to the Grinders Live media chat. We also got a chat over here in the PlateIQ webinar. I'm not seeing too many webinars now. Crane wants me to go on a rant about XWOBA because, we all like to hear my thoughts on why people are just way overusing that stat. But, I don't really want to get into it. I think it's still too new. I might make myself look foolish.
I'm going to create a stat called XWOBA with an EXWOBA, the WOBA from the past. Which is very similar to actual WOBA. How bad should his WOBA have been? XWOBA.
Right. No, I mean, we can start doing all the WOBAs. I mean, as long as you put a different initial in front of any stat that's out there, people will start to latch onto it and start to really, really focus on it. But doesn't look like we've got too many questions here in the chat here, Cheese. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for joining us here on the PlateIQ webinar for RotoGrinders.com. And for Dave Potts, I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back again soon with more learning here at RotoGrinders.